When I was in 4th grade, I used to go to my friend's house after school. And I just remember how her and her sister would always be fighting. They'd have an argument and then go into their separate rooms. And I do remember, however, there was one time where it was different. And they came together to play a piano duet. And for the first time, instead of fighting, there was laughter and fluidity coming from that piano bench. And I remember that made an impression on me. I think because growing up, I was a bit of a misfit. I was the daughter of immigrants from China, and I had a slight accent. So I was always asking that question for myself, how do I get to know you better? And music just seems to be a way to connect so easily. So I went back home, talked to my parents, said, do you think I could learn piano? And lo and behold, eventually for my 9th birthday present, I ended up getting probably the nerdiest gift a 9-year-old could ask for, piano lessons. So the theme of the conference today is X and Y. And that question of why music has followed me. I feel really lucky I was able to study music psychology and research that. And I was also able to bring music as I entered medical school. And when I entered medical school, the question of how do I get to know you naturally became that question, how do we get to know each other better? Especially in a context like medicine, where oftentimes we're expected to be strong and invulnerable. And so it's easy for us to put up walls and go into ourselves. And that has implications that's damaging for the physician-patient relationship, but also relationships between my classmates, colleagues in the medical profession. And I think that this going into ourselves is something that a lot of systems and institutions face. So in the next 15 minutes, I want to try to make the case that, one, music is something that, though usually thought of as a form of entertainment, can be a solution towards an interpersonal approach that we need. And I'm going to give medicine as one example of that. And second, I want to make the point that music is something that we can all be a part of and be a part of creating. And to illustrate both of these points, I'm going to describe a collaborative songwriting process. To get into this process, I'm going to start with a song and a story. And that's a story between Mike, who is a medical student, and Catherine, who is a patient. And they're both wearing pins, purple ribbons, in support of pancreatic cancer. So in this process, what happens is Mike and Catherine come together and they have a conversation with each other. For example, they find out that they both have a love of cats, and that Catherine, the patient, has this cat named Corona. And she really identifies with this cat in terms of the cat's spirit and being fearless and landing on your feet. And so Mike then goes back home and imagines that experience, relates it to his own, and writes a song. The song's title is actually Corona.
A flurry of petals, and with a flick of its tail, a brush of its whiskers, it's on its way. So get in trouble, there's no time to be meek. Don't let them declare you, you'll still land on your feet. So get in trouble.
So you get this really fun song, and you can imagine how special it was for them to come back together in a support group setting and share that song with each other, and share that song as well with the other students and patients involved. And that's when they took this photo here. She took out her little photo of the cat, and they were all wearing their ribbons, and it was just that very special connection and interpersonal relationship they had there. And also it changed the whole atmosphere of the group as well. So how do we get more of these kinds of interactions, connections, and also atmospheres going on into our settings or institutions or systems? And before we can address that and see why that's important, we have to see why it's been a problem. In medicine, empathy has shown to be declining throughout medical training, especially in the clinical year of medical school and throughout internship and residency. And it's not just a problem that the medical profession faces. Indeed, even among college students, we've seen that throughout the generations, empathy has been declining based on self-reported measures of empathy and cohort comparison studies. And the decline has been especially drastic in the 21st century. And along with this has been a rise in loneliness. In 2017, 2018 now, in fact, loneliness has been declared a public health epidemic by the former US Surgeon General. Loneliness is associated with a risk for mortality similar to that of smoking 15 cigarettes per day. And even in the UK, we see as well, at the beginning of 2018, we have a minister for loneliness appointed. So we can see that this is an issue, social connection, the decline of empathy. And it's worthwhile looking at how it's been addressed and what interventions have been done. And usually these interventions focus on empathy development as a trait. So they start looking at how we can improve levels of empathy within each person. But this can be damaging in the sense that if social connection is one problem, if we focus it on, put the burden on the individual, that tends to isolate individuals even more. So maybe this isn't the answer. And it's true that research hasn't shown this to be effective and it's been inclusive. However, there's some really interesting psychology research that suggests that rather than targeting each individual, target the interpersonal atmosphere and relationships and expectations that are in that system. So for example, they've done an intervention program across 56 schools, which in order to target bullying and the reduction of bullying, rather than targeting each person and trying to say, bullying is not okay in that way, target the atmosphere and change the ways in which we say, in general, bullying is not allowed. And they found that when you change the atmosphere, then you get the decline in disciplinary reports or disruptive reports behaviors. And they found that these reports declined by 30%. So we see that interpersonal relationships and these atmospheres and expectations are important. And it's the kind of thing that happens, for example, we saw in the music, in the collaborative songwriting process between Mike and between the patient, Catherine. So the next step then is to study and expand and systematize that. I lead a nonprofit, and that's what we're trying to do, expanding this collaborative songwriting process. And we started with students and patients across hospitals, across medical schools, starting in New York. And we've also been working with high school students, college students, veterans, children in foster care. And at the core of it is trying to create that interpersonal relationship with communication at the core. And Kausian is one of the participants. She's a nursing student who participated. And she's able to really describe this kind of intangible that happens in one of these settings.
This project it didn't directly incentivize that, but that was part of the culture, part of the atmosphere. And like membership in that atmosphere, in that community, mandated like some incentive for love and giving love in the song. As soon as like those barriers have been broken down through the experience of sharing and being vulnerable through song, the absence of those barriers kind of like created an intimacy that I don't often feel among people I've known for a very long time.
So Kasian really describes that atmosphere change and that kind of incentive for love that was felt. So by now you might be nodding along to the idea that interpersonal connections are important and an approach is important, and music might be a key part for that. And I see some of you have been nodding along as well. And so I'm nodding and you're nodding in response. And that actually creates somewhat of a change in the atmosphere of this room as well. And the reason why I'm bringing up this whole nodding thing is because nonverbal communication and music are quite similar in terms of being forms of relational communication. And that brings me to my second point, which is that music is something that we can all be a part of and create. So when I'm nodding and you're nodding and I nod back, there's a certain kind of timing to that. And it's a timing that, when we're doing that in sync, promotes affiliation. And another aspect of what happens when you're doing some movement like this, or a process, is that there's mimicry involved. So you're mimicking each other's movements. And it's been found that when we mimic and when we're in synchrony, that promotes bonding and affiliation. And you have a lot of that in music as well when we're making music. So if I'm playing, making some kind of sound, someone else copies that, or similarities and dynamics. And then of course there's the rhythm part that gets us in sync. So music actually is this very natural way of communicating and forming bonds with each other. And it's even more so very natural when we focus on the communication and relation part of it. And that's what Kaylee, a high school student, shows us when she imagines a story of a veteran she connected with. And this veteran shares his story, and she takes some notes about what he wants to convey, which includes messages like, hang in there. He used to be a Navy, worked in the Navy, and he shares a story about his wife who had passed away about 7 years ago. And this is a song that Kaylee writes.
Full steam ahead, don't let it shake you. You're stronger than you may be, so keep on sailing on the sea. Storms break you, but you can push through when hope is gone. You hear her song, oh, when you're lost at sea, yeah, you're on.
You have this really beautiful song that she's created, and it's even more beautiful because she has never written a song before. This is her first time doing this. But at the same time, a lot of you might be thinking, I can't sing like that. I've never had really formal musical training. And a lot of the people we work with actually have no musical training either. And it takes something as simple as a beat and creativity with your voice. And that's what Arjun, who's another high school student, does here.
Snowpiercer shards cut my skin, but we're trudging forward, marching on, surviving the wear. Hardships, chapped lips, what a little price to pay. We are freedom fighters striving for a better today. Hardships, chapped lips, what a little...
So Arjun just used a free online program that's accessible to anyone and wrote this as well with a veteran. And I think he has a really important message, which is life unclassed. And that at the key is at the heart of what we're doing. Is we're trying to unclass beyond the divides that separate us. And when we realize that we can all be storytellers and songwriters, because at the core what this is about is interpersonal and relationship, we can come together, because it goes back to that question, how do I get to know you better? So I have this wise mentor of mine, and I went to him once thinking that, saying, I figured it out. I know what it is that I want to do. And I started saying, what I want to do is I know that my heart is in music. And he said immediately, no, it's not that your heart is in music, but that music is in your heart. And I realized that it wasn't just music, it was those people. It was the sisters in the piano bench, it was the patients and my classmates and the children, the veterans. These are all parts of our hearts, and in our hearts we have spaces for a lot of these areas, and our hearts are stronger when they come together and intersect. So it doesn't have to be one or the other, and it doesn't have to be one identity or the other. Healing across divides is one of the biggest challenges facing us today, not just in medicine, but in politics, in religions, in ideologies. And if we cut each other off, cut ourselves off, we do a violence to ourselves and to each other. But music heals. At its core is a very natural form of relating and communication. So let us join in. Let us celebrate our stories, each one of which deserves to be heard together. Thank you.